Hey there, welcome back to Farmcraft. I'm John. This is an old chainsaw. It's not that old. It's about 20 years old. I bought it new. It's a Stihl MS192T. It's a top handle chainsaw, and this thing served me very well for many years. And then it started having trouble, and then it's kind of been on off, to where I would get a new carburetor, it would work for a little while, and then it would give me more trouble. And it finally got to the point where the thing's just really not usable. It won't run anymore. In this video, I'm going to figure out why and plan to do a chainsaw overhaul. I think this is more than just a carburetor issue. First thing I need to do, though, because I have used this saw quite a bit, is check the compression and make sure the thing is not just completely ragged out. If the compression's low, it's possible the thing would need a total rebuild, but I don't think that's going to be the issue. So let's tear into this thing and see if we can't figure it out. So the first thing I want to do is put this thing back to the standard setting on the carburetor so we can look at what it's doing. So I'm going to turn this screw all the way in until it's seated, and then it's one turn out is the standard setting. So there's half, there's one. That's the low speed screw. The high speed screw is supposed to be 3/4 of a turn out. So let me turn it all the way in. There, it's seated. So there's half, and there's a quarter. So 3/4 out on the high. It's got fresh fuel in it. It has a new fuel filter. The air filter's not clogged. All the basic stuff. The spark arrestor screen, I've checked all that stuff. I'm 99% sure none of those are the issue. Let's go see what this thing does. So I always run non-ethanol fuel in my equipment, my small engines, and this is fresh actually. Just put it in. That's interesting. The more I pump that, it'll run well for a little bit, and then it won't. Okay. This is actually the best I've had it run in a long time, and just for a few seconds. I still want to run this thing through the ringer because I've had this thing, I'll get it where it seems like, hey, it's running great now, and then the next time I go to use it, it doesn't. I'm concerned that there might be some leaking in the crankcase, maybe the crankcase seals. And actually that would make sense because that means I need to go heavy on the fuel to get the thing to run right, because it's sucking air from places where it shouldn't be. Yeah, what's going on there? I really think the compression's not the issue, because you can see it runs really well for a little while. But let's go ahead and check it anyway. So I should say, I'm pretty sure the carburetor on here is relatively new, and it's OEM. Got it from the Stihl dealer. And let's open up. Let's see, I've got the low speed screw opened up another turn. So I'll just summarize here. I opened up the low speed screw and then the high speed screw, and both of them way over their standard settings, and it didn't make any difference. So I turned the idle speed way up, and that also really didn't make any effect. It sure seems like a fuel issue. It's a clean, actually new air filter. Yeah, spark arrestor screen looks perfect. I'd say if anything, maybe running a little lean. Compression tester. Now this is the type that has the Schrader valve in the end, so it will give me an accurate reading even though the hose is really long. Yeah, anything over 150 is going to be good on this engine, and I'm getting 160 there. So compression is not the problem. And that's, you know, on an old machine, that's a really good thing to do, because if you don't have compression, now you're talking about engine rebuild. If you do have compression, it's just fuel and spark and timing, you know, and there's not much for timing on a two-stroke like this. That's just a coil. So you're really talking about fuel and spark. Now, fuel on a two-stroke can mean air leaks. That's what I'm kind of suspecting in this thing. The good compression makes me feel good about doing the repair. This is still a viable saw, and I should be able to make this thing run like the day it was new. And actually, since we heard it running good for a few seconds there, you knew the compression was good. But if you had any doubts, now you believe me. Before I actually tear it apart, I want to check the spark, and not just the presence of it, because I know it has spark, but the strength of it. So I've got an ignition tester here, and you can increase the size of the gap well beyond what the spark plug needs to jump, and get a sense of how your coil is doing. How strong is the spark? And I'm reaching this down there and putting it right on the threads of the spark plug hole, so we know we've got a good ground. There's so much plastic on chainsaws, you can't just clip anywhere that's metal and expect it to be a ground. So I'm clipping it directly to where the spark plug threads in. That's a good strong spark. I mean, on a small engine like this, it doesn't need to jump that far. That is jumping a 1/4 inch. So that's a good strong spark. That is not our issue. And I've also tested spark on the plug. The plug is sparking, and it's the correct plug, gapped appropriately, and it's new. Alright, let's put that back in there so I don't have stuff falling down into the cylinder. Alright, let's get this carburetor off of here. So yeah, I mean, I haven't been at this very long. In just a few minutes, I know I've got good compression, so I've got a potentially healthy engine, and I've got good spark. So we have a fuel or timing issue, which on an engine like this means fuel. Most of the time that's true. It is possible for timing to be an issue on a saw like this, but that wouldn't fit with the problems I'm having, and I'll explain more about timing when we get to that point. Right here on this saw is an intake boot, and these can develop cracks in them, and that will change your fuel mixture and give it real erratic behavior. I've replaced this before, checking to see if it has any cracks or anything in it. I'm not seeing anything. Yeah, I think it looks okay. Well, let's go ahead and check this carburetor out. I think this is unlikely to be the issue, but you never know. The only thing I'm basing that on is that it's new and it's OEM, but maybe I have too much confidence there. Just because it's new doesn't mean it's good. So yeah. I mean, that's pretty pliable. It's not perfect. You know, I say this thing's new. What I mean is it's like a year old. Maybe it sat on the shelf for a while before I got hold of it. That jet is open. Needle looks fine. Everything looks nice and clean. And again, everything looks clean. Diaphragms look good. So I'm just going to do some carb spray through the passages here. Now, there is a screen right there, but it looks perfect. This is the opening to the main jet, so when I spray through there, carb cleaner should come out of the top there. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it is. The idle circuit is here, and it comes out, gosh, it's going to be really hard to show you. That little hole there, and there's also a couple little holes that are behind the throttle plate there. And I've checked those. Those also seem to be open. Let me see if I can hold this guy open, and maybe you guys will see a little bit of carb spray shoot out. Yeah, I think you can see that. So, yeah, I've really looked this over well. I don't see any clogs, and everything's nice and clean. There's just no reason that this would be the problem. So I'm going to throw the carb back together, and we're going to dig a little deeper. If I don't find anything else, I will do an ultrasonic cleaning on this. I don't think it's necessary, and I want to know what the problem was, so I don't want to change anything right now, if that makes any sense. I'm hoping I'm going to find another issue. I can fix that issue and then try and start it and see if it works. At this point, I haven't really changed anything on the carburetor. If I don't find anything else and it still doesn't work, well then I'll ultrasonically clean this and see if that made a difference. This is the other side of the carburetor, and this section with the needle and the spring is always a little fiddly for me, but it's not too bad. So this diaphragm to me doesn't look bad, but it's actually pretty pliable, but it looks a little crispy. Yeah, this one's definitely better. I found this one in my stash of spare parts. So you know what I said about not changing anything in the carburetor? Well, scratch that. But I don't think this is going to make any difference. So let's dig a little deeper, taking this side cover off. So this is the coil which generates a spark every time this magnet in the flywheel passes by. That's really what dictates the timing in these machines. Now how could the timing be off? Well, this flywheel is on a key, and if you shear the key, the flywheel will be in the wrong position. That can make your timing off. I'm just mentioning this for people trying to fix their saws. I don't suspect that timing is an issue with mine, because my saw will run okay for a few seconds. If the timing was bad, it probably wouldn't run at all. So while I'm here, I'm going to use this Mighty Vac and see if I can find any evidence of leaks in the fuel lines. This is the main fuel line between the fuel tank and the carburetor. I'm just pumping it up with a couple PSI, and I think I hear a leak. There actually might be one. Alright, I think I may have discovered the problem. So this line right here is where the carburetor plugs in. It's drawing fuel through that hose, which goes up to the fuel tank. When I put a little bit of positive pressure on it, listen. I know you can't hear it on camera, but it's coming from here. It's not coming from up in the tank or anything like that. And actually it would be under suction, so when I change this to vacuum and try to pull from it, you hear it even more. So that's the problem, or at least that is a problem. If the carburetor's trying to pull fuel and it's getting air, that would explain why the thing can't run unless I pump the primer bulb a bunch. It'll run for a second and then it won't run anymore. It's because it's not able to pump the fuel because there's a hole in that line. You know, this little tool sure is handy because it's very hard to tell any other way if those lines are intact. But we're still not done. I want to check for some additional air leaks that can be quite common on two-stroke engines that are, say, 20 years old. So this boot has to be pushed through. Now what's holding it? Magic. Magic is holding it. Where's it even going? I figured out what this line was. That is going down into the crankcase. It comes in here, right there, and right there. This is called the impulse line. It transmits the pressure from the crankcase to the carburetor and drives the fuel pump. What I'm going to do is just replace all of these lines. They all kind of feel stiff. There's a big difference. These are nice and rubbery and pliable, and these feel really hard and stiff. And I know hard and stiff. So do you. So I didn't get the best footage of replacing the lines, but it's really easy. It's just a matter of pulling out the old lines. There's some hose barbs, and you just push them back together with the new lines. There's really nothing to it. Here I'm popping out the primer bulb, which also just pushes into a fuel line set. And I take out the old one. There I'm taking out another fuel line, popping in a new one. And then there's the fuel line, the new fuel line set for the primer bulb. Basically just pushing everything together. This is the old fuel line, and it was cracked on the underside. You couldn't see it until you took it off, and now it's gotten worse that I've bent it open, but that's where the break was. It's interesting. It's not too bad up here. That's a little stiff there, but this area is just barely even rubber anymore. This is all nice and pliable. There's your problem, lady. Now, there's a good chance this thing's fixed at this point. But since I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and do another test that is important and actually pretty easy to do on two strokes. The four things you need: fuel, compression, timing, and spark. I didn't do those in the right order, but the fuel is the big deal on two strokes because the intake goes through the crankcase and then into the cylinder because that's where all the lubrication comes from. That oil has to go into the crankcase and through it. You know, on a four-stroke, you're looking for problems with the carburetor, maybe a leak between the carburetor and the block, and then the fuel goes right into the cylinder from there. In case that's not clear, here's a quick diagram of a two-stroke. When the piston is going up, it's drawing fuel and air through the intake into the crankcase, and then when the piston's going down, it produces a positive pressure in that crankcase because of the piston movement. And there's a tube that allows the fuel in the crankcase to then go up into the combustion chamber where, of course, it's combusted. And then the cycle repeats. On a four-stroke, the fuel is drawn through the intake directly into the combustion chamber through the intake valve, and then it's combusted and exhausted. So there's far fewer places that an air leak could cause a problem. On a two-stroke, the fuel is going all over the place. So if you have air leaks anywhere, it's going to mess up your fuel mix. So basically what I want to do is check the seals on the entire crankcase of this machine. And there's several ways you can do it. I'm going to try to do it through the intake. There's three accesses. You got your intake, you got your exhaust, and you got your spark plug. I'm going to leave the spark plug in there, and that's just closed off. So now I need to close off the exhaust, and then we're going to use the Mighty Vac on the intake and check for leaks. Hopefully I won't find any, but if I do, I need to fix them because this thing's not going to run right if it's leaking pretty much anywhere. This is just rubber from an old inner tube. There, so now the exhaust is closed off. So the only way into the crankcase should be through this. And I think I have some attachments for the Mighty Vac that will go right onto that. Let's see. And I'm not building any pressure. Huh, I wonder why. So there's four ways in. Yeah, I was forgetting about this impulse line that we just talked about. This is obviously a communication with the crankcase. It uses crankcase pressure to run the fuel pump, and so I need to close this off in order to do this test. And I think this combination of adapters will work. Let's see what we get here. Oh yeah, it's pumping up. But it's coming down. Can you guys see that? I'm pumping it up to 5 psi, and you can see that it's pretty rapidly falling. And I'm just sticking my ear close to try to locate where it's leaking. Yeah, I think I have a leak somewhere. Wouldn't be a Farmcraft video if it was easy, huh? So I'm going to go to suction, and we're going to pump this up to 15 inches of mercury, which is about the same amount of pressure, and see if it'll hold suction. It is not holding suction at all. I need to fix this. This cannot leak, or this thing is not going to run right, and it's going to be a constant frustration for me. So let's see what we can do about narrowing down where this thing is leaking. So the usual suspects here are going to be the crankcase seals. There's a seal behind this flywheel and then on the other side behind the clutch. Now I'm just taking the coil off to get it out of the way. So this is a clean rag, just going to plug these holes. We're probably dealing with crankshaft seals. There's one on either side, but I want to pull the engine out because there's also some gaskets. I just want to get it out so that I can pressure test it and know for sure where all the leaks are. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and need to take this off. Yeah, so that thing just kind of holds this rubber boot over the intake there and squeezes it down to make sure it doesn't leak. When I get the engine out and test it, I think I'm going to go ahead and put this back on just to make sure that's not the leak. It really shouldn't be. It looks to be in good shape. Use a clean rag when you do this. You don't want something that's got little bits of metal or anything in it. Especially on the intake side, because anything it leaves behind is going to get sucked in. So I've got a hammer with a some kind of plastic head on it. Shouldn't mess up the shaft. You don't want to mess up the shaft. A key right there, and a key right there. And as I said before, if this key were to break, that can mess up the timing of the engine. Right here is one of our crankshaft seals, and you know, there's a bunch of sticky sawdust around it. It may very well be leaking. Wouldn't surprise me, 20-year-old saw. They don't last forever. Now this one is a left-hand thread, so I've got to put this on tighten to loosen it. And I probably should have done the flywheel first, huh? Because now I got to figure out a way to hold this thing. Shouldn't take a lot. So the clutch springs out the faster it spins. It's either just spring loaded, that's what's holding them in. So when the engine's not spinning over very fast, the chain is not driven. But once it gets up to a certain RPM, these are going to spring out, lock onto this drum here, and that then drives this, which is what your chain is actually driven directly from. The other thing we got here is a little needle bearing that I will be greasing before we put it back in, but it looks to be in good shape. And under here we have the oil pump. See, these hook together. So when this is being driven, this is also being driven, and the threads here drive a little worm which power the oil pump to oil the chain. I said that wrong. This is a worm drive, but the worm is actually the threads that I was pointing at there, and it's driving a pinion gear. We'll look at this in just a minute. These I think they call the chain guides. Here we go. Let me go get some compressed air. I'm going to blow all that off. We'll be right back. So there's our oil pump. This is the input from the tank, and that is output goes here to feed the bar. So one screw there, and I need to just pop this line off. There we go. And you can see the little pinion that is driven by that threaded section on this. That makes that pump spin. Pretty simple, clever little design. And I don't see as much dust or anything on this side sticking, which tells me that that seal probably isn't leaking. That's really making me think it's this side is my culprit, because there's all this junk. Maybe wrong, but we're going to test in a little bit here. Pull that impulse line down through. Yeah, that could stand to be replaced. I think I just have 4 bolts now, these 2 and these 2, and that engine should slide out of there. It is kind of crazy that this is the engine. This is quite a powerful engine. I mean, this thing will cut some significant wood, and it fits in the palm of your hand. Pretty impressive. Now we need to pressure test this thing, and I am going to put the intake boot back on. So we are set up. I can pump it up to 5 psi, and just like before, it's slowly going down. So I'm going to try to see if I can figure out where it's leaking. Put some soapy water on it. Oh, look at that. It's coming out here. It's coming out all over the place. That's quite interesting to me. Why would that be leaking? It's never been taken apart. I've had this saw since it was new. And everybody always tells me in the comments if there's RTV on it, it's not new. That is not true. Stihl uses RTV on a lot of their new builds. This is not the first Stihl piece of equipment that I bought brand new, and you find that. Anyway. Yeah, I got leaks all through there. It's not leaking from the seal itself, but leaking kind of around the seal. Can't really blame this one on the, well, at least not the shaft seals. No leak around the intake boot. Exhaust seal is working. It is all up here. Wasn't expecting that. Impulse line is not leaking. So you can see that leaking. But it's actually leaking on the outer edge of the seal, right beside this joint right there. And you can see down here. There's your other problem, lady. I checked, the bolts are all still tight. It's just that that gasket sealer has failed, and we need to redo it. But I'm excited. This is fixable, and I think I'm going to have my saw back, because this thing ran wonderfully for many years, and then just started acting up and has gotten just gradually worse and worse and worse. And me, like an idiot, was thinking, well, it's probably just worn out, instead of tearing into it and really investigating. I think this is going to put it back to like new once we get this fixed up. This also highlights the importance of having test equipment like the MightyVac, because I was 100%, well, 99% coming in here expecting it was going to be the seals. And of course you expect them to be leaking around the shaft, because that's the wear item. Why would this start leaking? I just was not expecting that at all. How frustrating would it be to come in here, tear this thing all the way down, replace both seals, put it back together, and it still isn't running right? Yeah, that's when you just say heck with it and you throw the thing away, because you're done fooling with it. But I know where it's leaking, and I'm going to replace the seals anyway. But yeah, that's I would not have done this except for having done that test. Good thing I did. Wow, it just comes right off. So I've come this far. I thought about it for a little bit. I think I'm going to go ahead and replace I think this thing only has one ring in it. Oh no, it has two. It's interesting, and they're 90 degrees out from each other. There's a little pin right there so that ring cannot rotate past it. So that's going to keep that gap in that position. And then 90 degrees over, there's another one right there. No scratches on the cylinder. That all looks good in there. So what I want is some new rings, 2 new seals, and then the impulse line. And then also I'm going to get some of the proper RTV for this. All right. That's about the easiest seal removal I've ever had. I might put some sealant compound around the outside, especially since they leaked around the outside. Need parts. Gonna take a while. In the meantime, I have everything cleaned up. Anything that matters, I'm gonna set over here underneath a clean rag so that it won't just collect dust while I'm waiting to put the thing back together. Das Original. So some of you might wonder why I'm using the same stuff that Stihl uses, and you know, this is RTV sealant. Well, you can't put a gasket in there because that's going to change your clearances. I seriously doubt this is inferior to Permatex RTV. I think this sealant probably just gets very hot and is in a difficult use situation, and any sealant you put there is eventually going to fail. That's my thinking. I think this is probably good stuff, so I'm going with Das Original. Was ist das? I took 2 years of German in high school. We finally have some parts and we can start thinking about putting this thing back together. Now, if you're wondering why I opted to do the rings, it's just because it's easy, they're cheap, I'm here. I had good compression, I obviously don't have to do this, but it just seems like a reasonable idea since it's very little trouble at this point. These rings do not require gapping. I think they have a pretty decent gap even if you close it all the way down to the size of the piston. The reason you need to gap the rings is because when it's in the cylinder it's going to have a certain amount of gap, and if it gets hotter the ring is going to expand and that gap is going to shrink. If the gap's too small and the ring tries to expand and it has nowhere to go, it's just going to push out on your cylinder and tear things up. So, but yeah, these rings, that's not an issue. So I'm going to use a little 2-cycle oil for my assembly lube. Old seal, old seal, new seal, and new seal. Now I'm sure someone's probably going to tell me I should be using assembly lube for this. So assembly lube is very sticky and it will stay on a surface much longer than engine oil, or in this case 2-stroke oil. And that's convenient when you're building an engine and it's going to be a very long project for you. But if you're going to get that engine together and running within a reasonable amount of time, I would say even an unreasonable amount of time, oil is going to do just fine, because oil is what's going to lubricate the engine for its entire service life. And what happens to your engine when you don't run it for a month? All the surfaces are just sitting there dripping off their oil. I mean, do you take it apart and put assembly lube on everything? Of course not. You rely on the oil to stay where it is and do what it does, and it works. I'm sure in some applications it's great. For a simple thing like this, some two-stroke oil just to make sure things are lubed on first startup is going to be fine. So I'm just taking some acetone to clean these surfaces so we can reassemble this crankcase. So this is the clutch side, which is on the same side as the exhaust. Yeah, this is the flywheel side, and that's where the coil bolt's on. So it goes in like that. Now, I had to stop and think a little bit before I pulled this piston out. I think you can actually just shove it up in there. I'm pretty sure people do that, but I know Stihl, and I believe they only give it to you when you buy the actual cylinder. They have a little plastic ring that acts as a ring compressor and allows you to push it on, and the ring gets pushed down by when it hits the wall of the cylinder there, and then you cut it off. They didn't give me one for just buying the rings, of course. What I'm going to try is a zip tie. Basically, I just need something around it to hold the rings in place until it gets into the actual cylinder, which is up inside here. You really don't have access to it, and you can't even see it once you start putting the piston in. Let's see what happens here. This might be too big, too clunky. I could do two smaller ones, but this one's big enough to cover both rings. So I'm making sure the rings are on their little respective pips, which keeps them clocked the way they're supposed to be. Any way that would go in there with that on there? I don't think so. No, that's too bulky. Not going to work. I was going to cut the excess off, but there's just no reason to. There's no way it's going to fit. I found a smaller zip tie that also covers both rings, and hopefully that's going to work. Nope. Zip tie is not going to work. Man, I've got to come up with something here. So the problem with the zip tie is it was too thick. It was hitting the sides, and the piston wouldn't go all the way up in where the rings are starting to enter the actual cylinder before the zip tie was already hitting. Seeing if I can just use a thin piece of plastic and some Gorilla Tape to make my own little version of what Stihl sends. Good. So they're on, but I don't think we're compressed far enough. I can just put a little something down in there to tighten it up. See, I just need to take up that much space, if you guys can see. You know, I didn't think to ask them if they would just sell me that ring compressor when I was there. That would probably be the thing to do. Now that's pretty good. Can't even see what I'm doing. Yeah, definitely buy the ring compressor if you can. I thought the zip ties would work, but that was a big fail, and this is a pain. I think I might have it. There it is. So these seals have rubber all around the outside, like seals often do, and I do not see a need to put additional sealant on them. They should not leak like they are. Okay, got that back in. I'm not confident I didn't get some oil on that surface, so I'm going to acetone that again. Right, time for the RTV, everybody's favorite. I don't particularly like doing this. I'd much rather use a gasket. RTV you can mess up. And this stuff doesn't even come with good directions, which I find a little annoying. It just kind of says, put it on and you can assemble it, or you can wait 10 minutes or until it's fully cured. So it's like, whatever, do what you want, is basically what the directions say. You don't want to put too much on. Pretty much I'm going to put a bead following around that. I mean, that should be all you need. Right, now this bolt hole goes towards the muffler. Don't get that backwards or you'll be doing this again. Being a little stubborn about threading. If you're new to mechanic work, that is one of the greatest tricks. Bolts didn't want to thread, they were trying to cross thread. So you just go backwards until you feel it clunk. That's when the threads have lined up, and then go forwards, and you'll get it every time. So backwards. I think that was already threaded in a little bit. Right there's a clunk. So you can go forward knowing you're not cross threading. So those are just barely snug. And just because this is how I use RTV, I usually let it sit and start to set up. You know, Permatex says let it sit for an hour and then go ahead and torque it down. That seems like a good idea to me because it's going to give you some spring in that. But I don't think I want to wait the whole hour. I don't want to change clearances or anything. It does need to compress all the way, so I don't know. I wish they gave you directions. But of course they want you to take it to a mechanic, so they're not going to give you directions. Right, so this is our impulse line. And I figured that was a preformed line, but it is not. It's just bent to that shape. It's a straight line, so that's what they gave me. At least that's what they told me. Now I'm skeptical because I see a spring in there. And they might be right actually, because I looked online too and I did not see anyone selling a preformed line. It's possible that this was that way originally, but they discontinued that and now they just sell what they gave me. Yeah, I think what I'm gonna do, I mean, it's not bad. Boy, that one's very collapsible. What I'm trying to decide is, do I want to reuse this or do I want to put on the new one? I'm sure this wasn't leaking because I checked it. It's certainly not going to collapse under vacuum because it's got that spring in it, whereas this one I can collapse pretty easily. How much vacuum does this actually generate? I don't know, that's a good question. Well, I feel better about that. I've got this thing pumped up as high as it'll go. It's at like 27, what is that, inches of mercury, and the line is not collapsed. Actually, still requires a fair amount of pressure to collapse it. So, yeah, it's not going to generate that much pressure in there, so that'll do fine. I think I'll go ahead and replace it. So it's been 15 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and torque down these crankcase bolts. And I've got my wrench set to 6 Newton meters. Wow, that's not very tight. I tightened it a little more because I just looked that torque spec up for a 5mm bolt. I don't have the torque spec that's recommended by Stihl. It didn't feel tight enough to me, so I'm good with that. I'm going to let that sit overnight, and then we're going to do the pressure test again and see if I have any leaks. Alright, it's the next day. Let's see if we sealed this thing up. So plugs in, the gasket's underneath the exhaust, the impulse line is plugged, and we're on the intake. Well, let's start out with vacuum. Yeah, it's not leaking down. It actually is leaking down a tiny bit, but it's very slow, much slower than it was before. I wasn't even able to get it up to 15 before. So there's a very slow leak down when I get all the way up to 15. I actually hear it on the exhaust. So my exhaust gasket is not holding right. I tried tightening those bolts and then checking it again, but there was still a tiny bit of leak down. So let's put it on positive pressure and go up to 5 psi. Yeah, so that's holding. The problem with negative pressure is you can't use soapy water to find the leak. So it's falling very, very, very slowly. Slowly enough that it wouldn't be a problem, but I am curious. I just want to see if there's any leakage around this crankcase or the seals. Yeah, I don't see any leakage there, even though this is dropping slightly. So, kind of hard to say where that might be leaking. I guess I'll keep looking. I checked the other areas for possible leaks, the intake boot, the exhaust, the impulse line, and I did not find any evidence of leaking anywhere. Well, I'd love for this thing to just hold. I think it's way better than it was, and I bet you it's going to run fine, because the leak is so slow. I mean, remember, this thing is going positive, negative so fast. The leak has to be pretty significant for it to affect anything. For all I know, it's leaking in my test setup, or, yeah, I'm not going to worry about it. We're going to put this thing back together, and we're going to run it, and I bet it's going to run just fine. Yeah, I think it was leaking right there. In fact, I can see a little bit of the soapy water inside that gasket where it should not be. That's just not an ideal way to close that off, I guess. Turns over very nicely. You can't see the ring gaps when it's assembled, but it moves perfectly. If they weren't on those in the right place, the ring would be being pressed out and it would not turn over so easily. So yeah, I'm confident it's all good. So you do want to grease this, but you don't want a ton on there. You don't want it slinging off and getting in your clutch. I still need to tighten that, but I'm going to put the flywheel on first. So doing the old business card trick to set the gap for the coil. So the magnet is on the flywheel right there, and the coil is magnetically attached to it right now. Business card in between, that gives you your proper clearance. Click. Now I can go ahead and tighten this clutch to the proper torque spec. I'm going to hang on to the flywheel over here. And you have to go, it's a left hand, so you got to go left like you're loosening. Click. Alright, now I got to get this handle back on. This is going to be fun. So this is the trickiest part, is getting this all lined up. I got to get the impulse line back on that little nipple right there. I got to get the boot pushed through that, and these need to come up through. I'll do that first. I'll just come up through that hole. Let me see if I can get this impulse line on that. Fuel line needs to come through that hole. A lot of things all coming together at once here. I got that. I'm really having to wrench on this impulse line, and these are pretty good pliers for that, but I don't want to damage it, so I'm going to put some Gorilla Tape on the jaws. Yeah, I got it on there. I wish it would go on just a touch further, but yeah, no, that's good actually. Hard to see. Now it's a matter of getting this boot up through this hole. Birthed it. I think it's on there. This is the vent, I believe. It's the vent. And the other two lines go to the carburetor. Now, don't forget to put this little ring back in. Now we can look at getting these things screwed back in position so that the handle's actually on. Okay, carburetor. This line goes straight back into that one, and then this one pointing down goes to this one. Yeah, forgot something there. Ain't gonna work like that. Where'd it go? What did I forget? You know what I forgot. What did I forget? This guy. Is it that way? It must be that way. Yeah, that's what does your throttle from the trigger. Not gonna work without that. Choke is open. Trying not to forget things. But especially when something's been sitting on the bench this long, you tend to forget things. Alright, so this is my first time attempting to start. Got it on choke. Pump this guy until we get some fuel. Alright. Let's see what happens here. So I see people doing this a lot of different ways. The thing about a chainsaw, or any two-stroke, you don't want it to run lean. If it's running lean, the fuel mixture is less than it's supposed to be, and you get less lubrication, and it also runs hotter. So you're kind of hurting your engine when you run it lean. Not kind of, you are. So this thing, the standard setting is 1 turn out. And that seemed to run pretty well. I think that's where I'm going to leave it. Well, that thing is running perfect. It has certainly not run like that in many years. That is awesome. So this is what I think happened with this saw. The fuel line cracked, and that's when it really stopped running in spite of having a new carburetor. Me just throwing a carburetor on there, I'll admit, is doing the parts cannon thing. But this carburetor's given me so much trouble over the years. It's kind of the knee-jerk reflex, and they're not that expensive. I think it was like $35 or something for a new carburetor. When it's that cheap and you're saving a lot of time, and it's also, you know, it gives you some diagnostic information even if it doesn't fix anything, because you know the carburetor's not the problem now. Is that the best thing to do or not? When the parts are cheap and they're going to give you information regardless, I think throwing some parts at it that makes sense can be the right answer, but that's just me. Anyway, so the fuel line was the major issue. That's why it wouldn't run at all. But this thing for years has been giving me these kind of off and on problems where it would sort of run right and then it wouldn't, and I'm constantly adjusting the carburetor trying to get the thing to run right. And I think that was the leaking crankcase. It was probably varying based on the temperature of the engine, how much it was leaking, so that my carburetor adjustments were never accurate. It would be right for the moment, but then the next time I went to use it, it's going to leak more or less depending on ambient temperature when I start it, or, you know, what the temperature that the engine gets up to when I'm trying to use it. And that amount of leakage is varying, causing my fuel mixture to vary. So no matter what I did, the thing just wouldn't run reliably. And I'm really hopeful that this thing is kind of back to square one. If I remember right, I got like 10 years of trouble-free use out of this thing when I first got it. and hopefully I'll get something like that again. It's one of those things on two-strokes that are giving you trouble. You've got to pressure test the crankcase and see if you're leaking. Let's see if it'll start right back up. I'm going to make sure the high is on the standard setting as well. If I pull the trigger right now to full throttle, it should four-stroke. I don't know where that term comes from, but it just sounds, I guess, more like a four-stroke. It goes from that high-pitched, clear whine of a two-stroke to kind of a more rumbly, choppy sound. And you're going to hear it here. I'm going to hold the trigger down. I'm going to turn the high in until you start to hear that more smooth, high-pitched whine, and then I'm going to turn it back out. Now, you'd think, oh, well, I want it to run that smooth amount. Well, it's running a little bit lean right there, especially when you put it under load. It should be a little rich right now, since it's not under load when it's going high speed, if any of that makes sense. We're going to listen to it four-stroke. I'm going to turn it until the four-stroking stops, and then we're a little bit lean, and then I'm going to turn it back to open it up, and you'll hear it four-stroke again. I let it idle for a little while so that I can check it again in just a second here. By the way, my saw is leaking bar oil because I'm using hydraulic oil, which is really too thin, and it just kind of comes out, especially when you're running it full throttle like this. So now I want to go cut some wood with it. We're going to wear those rings in a little bit, and then we're going to recheck the compression. Yeah, just to see. Maybe it changed the compression a little bit. I'll be kind of curious. One thing I've learned if you want to fire up the comments section is to show using my chainsaw one-handed. You should never use a chainsaw one-handed. Only an idiot would do that. It's dangerous and foolish, and you're going to kill yourself in a matter of seconds if you do it. Yep. Do what I say, not what I do. Might not seem like a big thing, but man, I'm happy to have my saw back. This thing's running great. I think it will continue to for a long time. Let's go check the compression and then wrap this video up. Yeah, if anything, I'd say the compression went down a hair, maybe. But that's not really surprising to me because those rings aren't worn in yet. We're over a 150, a little over 155 is what it's reading. So I have to go back and check the footage and see what the other one was, but yeah, I think that's going to be just fine. Well, there you go, guys. Chainsaw is fixed. It's running perfectly. Man, I'm happy about that. Have I mentioned I'm happy about that? So I need this to finish another job that's going to be another video that's been held up on getting released because I didn't have a chainsaw that was fixed. And this took so long because the parts were taking forever. Anyway, we're done with that. I'm going to get back to work. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.